the cell construction, we have a drawing and we have a 300,000 cubic yard capacity, but one of the things that ran through the literature was based on the Army Corps study, you would be putting 300,000 cubic yards into a pit that was, pick the numbers, I don't know, 40, 45, 47 feet deep, 650 feet across. They had some set of numbers in there, some dimensions. And the dimensions were based on degree of consolidation over a certain period before capping to allow, because initially this stuff is big, relatively high water content, and it's supposed to be consolidating, squeezing out some amount of that sediment. So it comes down within the borders of this hole you dug. One of the things that governs the amount of stuff you put in when is the funding on the of the project. There was a comment made in the literature that if you had to do more sooner, you need a bigger hole, because you're going to fill up the hole you have before consolidation. Where does the funding decision sit in the grand scheme of things? Between now and May, we're going to know what we're going to have in 2013. Where are we? 2013, I think, was the number you had up there for when you start filling the hole. That also affects how you handle the hole, the timing of it. Okay. The matter of the cell filling. There's been entirely inadequate treatment of mechanical dredging and the process of mechanical dredging. We have a major project, you and me, have a major project running on the upper Hudson River. Not right now, because it's supposed to be cold and icy up there. But when it starts to warm up, GE and EPA are going to continue dredging out contaminated sediments in the vicinity of Thompson Island. It's a mechanical dredging operation for the most part. And when you read through the experience of the Thompson Island pool dredging, there's a couple things that strike you. It's all mechanical. But they had some interesting times with debris. You come down with a mechanical bucket and start to dig a little bit, you got a tree in the way, you got some wire in the way. I know you guys never lose any wire overboard around here. So get any wire overboard or anything else that tends to leave the bucket partly open, your loss per bucket load can go up significantly. Loss meaning the amount of sediment that's placed in the water column as you're moving the bucket up through the water column. So debris was an issue. Along with debris goes just the normal mechanical resuspension process. The bucket hits the bottom, you stir up a certain amount of sediment, you got a cloud of sediment moving off downstream. And presumably, since we're dredging to get rid of contamination, we have the potential to introduce some amount of contamination from that resuspension. Meaning that I'm digging here, and I have the potential to contaminate more or recontaminate something downstream. So the phasing of dredging, what it means in terms of, it's okay if I contaminate that area and then I'm going along and I clean it up. Presumably each time I do this, I get a little bit less contamination being dispersed. It affects the phasing of the project. It also affects the flux of contaminant downstream. We saw some numbers associated with the disposal process, and they were very low. The movement, flux, the flow of contamination that will result when you drop this mass of sediment into the pit cell and you allow it to consolidate, squeezing out water and some amount of contamination. How much contaminant might be lost in that evolution? The Army Corps numbers look very low, meaning that the 1 or 2% of sediment you lose every time you run a mechanical bucket up through the water column may represent a significant source of contaminant loss. Significant relative to the low numbers you see from the dumping of the stuff in the cell. Meaning that for a period of time, should be short, remember all the time is we're looking off down the road a little bit, at least, hell, they're talking 46 years, that's a fair ways down the road. We're trying to reduce the flow of sediment out of the harbor into Buzzards Bay. We're trying to reduce the exposure of the local benthic community, biological community, pelagic and benthic, to the contaminant. So there should be some, or should have been some discussion of that. All of that is well within our abilities. There was some attempt to model some pieces of that from the sampling that was done around the dredging, the disposal, so the operation of the Harbor Development Commission. But I think there ought to be a lot more discussion about it. Then we get to the whole issue of air quality. The mechanical dredging in the upper Hudson River did result in some finite number of violations of air quality. They're laid out, and they're finite in the number of days. So there are situations where there is a potential for exceedance of air quality criteria. Now, whether that's enough of an issue, or whether you don't really care for exceedance of air quality criteria because you're looking at continuing exposure to subcritical, my word, levels of contaminant, airborne contaminant, it's something that we need to discuss. And we need the health department involved in this, and we need some data from the area. It has not been very well treated other than the Jacobs model. When you look at the Jacobs model and the criteria they're using, they look to be lower. I'm not an air quality type, so I can't really comment. I didn't have time to really dig into the air quality issue. I can't comment on the criteria that are being used. But the numbers that Jacobs had were different than the numbers that are used on the Upper Hudson. I don't know why. But air quality is certainly an issue. And we've heard it before. We heard it the first day we started talking about cleaning up New Bedford Harbor. So it's nothing that's new to the discussion. We move to cell protocols. It's not at all clear how the cells are to be filled. Isn't that a silly comment? Guy goes out there with a wheelbarrow of mud and he pours it in the hole. End of story. Well, it's not quite as simple as that. There's a big time lag in this whole thing. A, because you want stuff to consolidate. B, you don't have enough money to do what you want to do when you want to do it. But against that comes the C. You want to isolate that stuff as quickly as you can. There certainly seems to be room for some consideration of interim capping. That at the end of year one, some amount of clean material, possibly activated. I understand that there is a study, parenthetical statement. There's a study of activated capping. I'll talk about that in a second, coming out. But there certainly seems to be room for some consideration of interim capping. What that means in terms of volume and the rest, what that means in terms of cell capacity and the rest, I don't know. But that's what would be on the table. The idea that you put this stuff out there, just dump it in the hole, and then wait until it's consolidated enough, does not seem to be the best protocol in the interest of, if you're really interested in isolation of contamination. So the cell protocol, important. The cap, a 3-foot cap of sand is what's proposed. Then the next statement is a 3-foot cap of sand with an exceedingly low carbon content, well under 1%. And the next statement is all of the contamination that will be coming from this underlying material will be trapped in the lower foot of the cap. I don't know how that was arrived at. But it, in my view, would be quite problematic given the carbon content of the sand. Normal and similar to capacity for PCBs in particular is carbon content. The higher the carbon content of sediment, more PCB that's assimilated. That's natural. Then we come to the unnatural, that's you and me, man-made. The salt we might be able to put into the cap. There have been a number of projects that have used activated caps experimentally. One was in the Anacostia River in Washington. There is, I understand, as I said earlier, a study coming out, EPA and Army Corps, I think. Was the Corps involved in that?
Which one, I'm sorry?
The activated cap. Army,
Yes.
Army Corps,
Yes, Burdick, Environmental Research.
Right.
Development Center.
the old Waterways Experiment Station for the grayheads. Okay. There certainly seems to be some room for consideration of activated cap. And all of that, I think, has to be considered because it does take some time. It's not something that gets developed in June of the year that you're going to close in July. So early on, and then there's probably some costs involved as well. So the cap characteristics. I'm going to stop there because I think out of this list, we could establish a number of issues that need to be addressed sooner and a number of issues that can be addressed later, our priorities as we go off down the road, this technical working group road. To recap though, no pun intended, there is some precedent for the use of cells. They have the potential to do the job. How well they do the job depends on design and execution. Both of those aspects really benefit from monitoring. The one issue that's really absent in all of these papers, other than saying, you're going to take care of it. I know George, he's a good head and he's going to take care of it. Ain't enough. You got to lay out carefully the monitoring program that's going to be followed during all pieces of the project. Now, I realize, having been involved in a number of these over the years, that there are costs associated with this. But some one way or the other, we got to figure out a way to cover those costs. Because the best engineer can often use and benefit from some oversight. Everybody. You can learn, I can learn from you and you can learn from me. The project gets better because of it. And there is virtually no information in any of this about just how manpower and measurements to be made, we're going to monitor this project. So that's the last and maybe the first item that you really want to get at. Who's going to keep an eye on what's going on? Has the potential to do the job. Has the potential to benefit all of us. And save us some money. I was going to say save a few bucks. Save some money. Okay? Save a lot of time. I had you 900,000 cubic yards, of which you've dredged 176,000. But I heard it got to 225,000, okay? The potential to get another 300,000 out of that 900,000 yards. Someone might ask, incidentally, what the yardage, cubic yardage means in terms of mass of contamination. Another issue to be discussed, because clearly there's a lot of PCBs in that upper harbor above Cogswell Street. So, yes, you're getting the cubic yardage done, but you also have to remember that you want to get the mass of contamination out of here as well. But you got halfway down the road or so, in maybe 3 to 4 years, that's something we can all hope to see. 46 years might be another story. So, we're here today to build a partnership to look at these issues. Okay? And I hope that EPA and whoever else, the state, the town, city, are involved in the regulation and the management of this whole thing, take our efforts seriously. And if they don't, if we have an indication that that's the case, we don't need to pursue the activity. And in not pursuing that activity, I would submit, everyone's gonna suffer, certainly our kids and grandkids.